to be free, just to be free. Now when we've taken our first step towards a life of complete freedom, we can see our dream getting closer.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good evening and welcome to the special focus. I am Zahid Jadwat and we are together until 8 p.m. tonight right here on Salam Media. Of course, via our live stream on salammedia.com/listen-live, on our Facebook page and on our YouTube page, as well as coming to you live on our Twitter handle. Thank you so much for tuning in. Coming up on the show tonight, as always, you can look forward to yet another in-depth discussion that informs you about what's happening in your world around you. And tonight, the major discussion we are going to have is that of the state of our railway infrastructure in South Africa, particularly in Gauteng, where most railway infrastructure has been stripped bare by looters. After that, it's time for our segment of the Quanto Private Game Reserve competition. So a lucky couple is going to win an exclusive stay at the legendary Quanto Private Game Reserve. That's situated outside Port Elizabeth in the Eastern Cape. So that's coming up at about 7:45, and I'm really excited and looking forward to that part of the show. We have two contestants lined up for us, in fact, and I'm sure they are really excited and looking forward to this part of the show. But coming back to our main topic of discussion for this evening, vandalization at train stations across South Africa has increased dramatically over the last few years. In Gauteng alone, the looting has risen sharply over the past 3 years at a cost of more than 2 billion rand. The situation has deteriorated to such an extent that the Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa, that's PRASA, confirmed in September that only 3 out of 17 rail lines were operational in the Gauteng province. The cost of the looting and destruction in Gauteng alone will boggle your mind, since there have been a total of 1,833 incidents of vandalization at train stations in Gauteng over the past 3 years at a replacement cost in excess of 2 billion rand. A report by the Daily Maverick earlier on highlighted that hundreds of meters of rails were stolen from multiple railway tracks at a particular station that they visited, and the cuts on some of the remaining rails suggest that the use of special equipment. Now the buildings stand bare with doors, window frames and taps all removed. And this is really a sad state of affairs, because what could arguably have been deemed one of the best developed railway systems in Africa, if not the world, just a few decades ago, has now been reduced to just a few functional bits and pieces here and there. And sadly, the most underprivileged commuters have to suffer as a result. And that is why we are turning the attention to this burning issue tonight. Let me introduce you to our guests. Firstly, we have Ms. Lillian Mofokeng, who is the spokesperson for Gauteng Metrorail. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, Zahid, and thank you very much for having us.
Later on in the show, we will be joined by Mr. Steve Harris, who is the General Secretary of the United National Transport Union, and then Mr. Chris Hunsinger, who is the Shadow Minister of Transport at the Democratic Alliance, and also Mr. Lubabalo Tinzi, who is the SATAWU's National Sector Coordinator in PRASA. But that we'll get to them in a few minutes at about 7:15 this evening. In the meantime, let's just continue with you, Ms. Mofokeng. So what is the current situation with railway infrastructure in Gauteng? I believe that's the region that you are going to be representing on behalf of this evening. Of course, you do come from the Metrorail in Gauteng. So just an update on what's the situation like in Gauteng.
Thank you very much. That is correct. I am representing Gauteng Metrorail. And as Gauteng Metrorail management, we are the first ones to admit that we are currently experiencing an alarming increase in the number of reported cases of infrastructure vandalism, theft, which ranges from different areas, from our overhead lines being vandalized, critical substations, as well as the stations and depots, buildings whereby we are actually using to be able to operate the services. The rise that we are experiencing currently, it is in an unprecedented levels that are rising. And I can confirm that this is evident also that when we are looking at the investigations, it is evident on the growth in the eliciting trading of copper and steel on the black market, which means that we have to now look at realigning our resources and investing much more in terms of our ability to secure our network, but most importantly, to also ensure that we secure whatever that we are going to rebuild. We are also now seeing a situation whereby, remember, government has given us money to try and improve in terms of our network and operations. Now it is made that part of this vandalism is actually going to help to determine that we need to rearrange our capabilities and mainly make sure that majority of that is redirected into the reinvestment and rebuilding of our infrastructure networks. Maybe to give our viewers an idea and a view that in Gauteng Metrorail, we are operating a very open system, and our network has got about 218 stations, and out of those stations, we run and operate a kilometer track of 1,380, which includes also another additional 1,157 kilometer track of network within our yards. So obviously it will be difficult for us to secure each and every kilometer track because this system is quite open. We will need to reinvest in security and ensuring that we employ new technologies that can assist us to rebuild our infrastructure. We have seen the minister has recently launched in Gauteng at Rhodesfield a system which we called an integrated security plan for PRASA to help us working with other law enforcement departments and justice systems to help us to be able to nip this market of illegal trading of copper so that we can be able to reduce and minimize.
All right, thank you so much for that update. So just to confirm, I think PRASA earlier on stated that only 3 out of 17 rail lines were operational in Gauteng. Is this still the situation?
Yes, I can confirm that post the lockdown level, and when we moved to level 3 and when PRASA was allowed to operate, Metrorail started the service in July to operate the Pienaarsport corridor, and we slowly moved to Elandsfontein. We are running train service between Pienaarsport to Pretoria, and for the Tembisa community, we are running between Elandsfontein and Leralla. But we have also increased our operations, whereby in Naledi, for the Soweto community, we are operating between Naledi and Park Station. It is important that I highlight that we have a service resumption plan that is corridor-based and in alignment with the phased-in approach, which we are implementing, which is looking at resuscitating most of the lines. Remember, currently we are operating with diesel locomotives. So it is important that for sustainability of services, we also rebuild, especially the electrical supply, so that we can go back to OHTE supply, whereby we are using traction power to minimize the cost of diesel locomotives that we are currently incurring, because it will not be practical for us or sustainable even for our end users as commuters to operate on diesels. So we have a full-fledged plan that is in a phased-in approach. We are hoping that in the next few weeks, we will be making announcements that are looking also at resuscitating our Salisbury corridor. We are also working very hard. We have started engagements with the Mabopane stakeholders so that we can start to make sure that we agree and highlight to them what is coming in that presidential corridor that we had since announced that we are looking at a broader aspect. So there's a proposal that we are tabling now with stakeholders in the transport industry for that corridor. We are also looking at Ferrienageng corridor, whereby plans are at advanced stage, whereby we are assessing what is damaged and the minimal possibilities of us being able to at least bring back the services in that corridor. So plans are quite in advice. We are hoping by the end of this financial year, most of the corridors would be recovered.
And I'm sure many commuters are, of course, looking forward to the announcements which you are expecting to make in the next few weeks or so. But and you also mentioned some plans which are being formulated by Metrorail as well. We'll get to those plans, but in the meantime, do you know what is perhaps contributing to this vandalism of metro rail stations? And you mentioned something as well about the scrap metal industry as well. But just what do you think has contributed to the surge in vandalism?
The main reason is the open system that we operate, as I have indicated. And we were having a shortage in terms of security contracts that we unfortunately had to terminate in the previous financial year. And when we terminated those security contracts, plus the lockdown situation. Remember, during lockdown, as much as people were not necessarily moving around, there were still opportunistic people in the communities. Unfortunately, it's actually from those same communities that we are obliged and responsible of saving, where they were looking at this as an opportunity for them to actually start attacking our infrastructure. That is what contributed to the levels that we are at now.
And unfortunately, that is the sad situation where many of the members of the communities themselves are complicit in this crime that is taking place, and which is unfortunately leading to the destruction of our railway system. Also, I think copper theft is also one of the main causes of this vandalism. Has Metrorail been in consultation and in conversation with metal recycling associations, etc., to try and work ways how how the industry can also participate, the metal recycling industry can be a part of the solution as well?
The integrated safety security plan that the minister has launched enables us to make sure that all the different key role players are actually on board and are able to can support us. We do have this security plan that is also having 5 pillars. One of the pillars is looking at intelligence gathering, and obviously that we cannot do alone. We'll need all the different role players and industry players to also be part of this, especially including the law enforcement agencies. We are also making sure that we're analyzing and coordinating all the data that we have so that it can lead us to information that we give to law enforcement agencies, and for them to have a proactive approach that helps us also, that in terms of in situations whereby there are tip-offs and there are hotspots, we are able to attack those areas more in advance. There's also a technological element that comes into play where we do not want to be reactive, but we want to make sure that we use different resources, being it with our physical security, but with technology. And if we use all other people which are affected, and also the other role players like your Transnet, ESCOM, we are actually looking at the broader aspect of looking at where people are affected by this vandalism.
All right, thank you so much. And just a final question before I let you go. What is it that Metrorail is doing now to combat this problem? Just in a nutshell, your plans to address this issue?
In a nutshell, in Gauteng Metrorail, we do have a target that we are working around, which is of ensuring that we insource. Remember, the minister did announce that we are now insourcing security so that we try and minimize the issue of security contracts in our space. And it will help us to have better control in terms of monitoring closely how all the efforts that we are putting is actually bearing fruits. So in Gauteng, we have already managed to employ and insource about 800, over 800 security officials at different levels. whom are actually going to be able to assist us in combating these increasing levels of crime. However, we are the first ones to acknowledge that we are not going to be able to win this battle if the community that we are serving do not also come into the party and partner with us, help us. They know the people that are participating in these criminal activities. Some of them are our uncles, our husbands, and the people in the communities. We know them. So they need to help us report these acts of vandalism to the nearest police stations so that we can be able to work together with the communities to build this railway infrastructure, which we know serves the lowest market to be able to access economic opportunities. I can assure you that we do have currently stability within PRASA. We've got CEOs that are appointed at all the different divisions, whom are actually leading, and making sure that they give us the guidance and the leadership, and most importantly, the support that we need. And even our employees, I'm glad that we've got Satau and Untu that is also joining in this conversation, because they would tell you that we are the first ones to acknowledge the challenges, and we have actually made a call to them to partner with us so that we can identify those long-hanging fruits and the things that we can be able to do it together. We cannot do it alone as management, but we need all the role players, especially our employees, and we are a highly unionized environment, and we respect the inputs that we will be getting in shaping the future of our valuable asset in this public transport of Metrorail.
All right, thank you so much for that interesting analysis and contribution, Ms. Lillian Mofokeng, who is the spokesperson for Gauteng Metrorail, speaking to us about what is exactly the situation with regards to railway station and vandalism of these railway stations and infrastructure in Gauteng province especially. And in fact, she's just mentioned that some of these measures which have been taken to combat the scourge is actually Metrorail has employed and insourced about 800 officials to combat an increase in vandalism. And of course, she does urge one and all to play their part. She's urged the community members to report vandalism to their nearest police station, because we also have a role to play in stopping the scourge of vandalism. But thank you so much for your time and contribution, Ms. Mofokeng.
Thank you very much, Zahid.
And we now welcome our fellow panelists in the last few minutes that we do have of the show. Unfortunately, time is against us, so we are going to try to have to move through this as swiftly as possible. Let me welcome Mr. Steve Harris, who is the General Secretary of United National Transport Union. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Good evening, and good evening to your listeners, and thanks for the opportunity.
And we have Mr. Chris Hunsinger, who is the Shadow Minister of Transport at the Democratic Alliance. Thank you so much for joining us, to you as well.
Good evening, Zahid, and good evening, Mr. Harris and viewers.
Hello, Chris.
And last but not least, let me welcome Mr. Lubabalo Tinzi, who is Ottawa's National Sector Coordinator in PRASA. Thank you so much for joining us. Okay, it seems we have not yet been joined by Mr. Lubabalo Tinzi. We'll try and get him later on in the show as time progresses. But of course, time is against us this evening, so we are going to have to try to get through this as swiftly as possible. And just before this, we were speaking to Ms. Lillian Mofokeng, the spokesperson for Gauteng Metrorail, and she was speaking to us about the situation in Gauteng with regards to vandalism of railway stations, etc. And now, just to get a broader picture, a national picture on this, we are going to be speaking to Mr. Chris Hunsinger, the Shadow Minister of Transport at the Democratic Alliance, and Mr. Steve Harris also joins us to give us this perspective on how this affects commuters on a daily basis. So let's begin with you, Mr. Chris Hunsinger. What is the current situation with railway infrastructure on a much more nationwide scale? We've just heard what happened in Gauteng, but on a more nationwide scale, what do you think is the current situation like?
Look, we had to deal with a lockdown situation, so there were very restricted ability to monitor and to get around to places for oversight and inspection. So the first indication of a status quo was when we had the announcement of a continuation of rail services on the 1st of June, which was then extended to the 1st of July. And at that stage, then the commencement could only happen in 163 kilometers of the 2,228 kilometers under control of PRASA. That was the first indication of the status at that stage. Subsequently, a number of corridors have been opened, but sadly, there's also been an increase of cable theft, even a rail track theft, despite the commencement of services after that. So quicker than what the rail could actually get on track, infrastructure was destroyed. Also buildings, platforms, stations, and the estimations run into the billions of what has been vandalized. And let me also immediately say that, we are extremely appreciative of staff and officials at PRASA Metrorail that are really trying their best to make things work under these very difficult and very awkward situation of trying to get trains and coaches on track, but then having to be confronted with the fact that in some places there's just nothing, to such an extent that diesel locomotives as an emergency measure has been used and employed now to pull coaches, which brings other security issues into the equation again, because the diesel units are not equipped to adequately function the doors and the braking systems due to a voltage difference between what the locomotive can generate and what the coaches need for the doors to open and everything to function well. So there's a lot of emergency measures taking place in order to get trains moving. So yes, of the 17 corridors in Gauteng, an increasing number from 3 now to I think 5 is operational. In Cape Town, the central corridor is being opened, where for the past 2 months we've only had the southern line functioning. So gradually we see an increase, but it's really sad to stand at stations and to see and experience the vandalism, what has been taking place. It's really a sad sight.
And of course, this whatever does happen with the railway system, of course, this does affect the most underprivileged people, because of course we do know that the train system does serve the most underprivileged sectors of our communities. So, Mr. Steve Harris, how do you think this impacts the most underprivileged commuters, people who have been depending on the affordability of railway systems, now having no other option but to use other means of transport?
Zahid, thank you. It's basically doubled their cost, if not tripled their cost, to get to work and to get to wherever they need to get to. That's the unfortunate part that we find ourselves in. And these are, as you have indicated, the very underprivileged people that have not got the means to be able to pay taxis, and at this point in time they have no other alternative but to use taxis to get to work, if they are privileged to have work at this point in time. And yes, it's just an exorbitant increase in their cost of living, and it's not going to be over for quite some time. The biggest problem that we had was the fact that the courts had declared the previous contracts null and void, and we sat without security people. But if you have been following our demands from Untu, we've been quite vocal to have stated that we wanted a engagement from government level, with the Minister of Public Enterprises, Minister of Transport, Minister of Police, and the Minister of South African Defence Force, so that we could find an alternate And unfortunately, yeah, our appeal came to nothing, and I just put the blame squarely on the there's no political will from the politicians at this point in time, because if you look at how they've allowed state assets to deteriorate under these circumstances, it's the worst that I've seen in my entire life, and it's going to take billions to repair. But in the interim, the biggest the problem that we faced with is that the poorest of the poor are being penalized, and that's
Mm.
unacceptable.
Yeah, indeed, that is, of course, one of the saddest parts of this whole thing is this whole situation is that the poorest of the poor are being affected, and that's, of course, why we are covering this, because here at Salam Media we do follow this ethos of humanitarian journalism, where we cover what actually affects the most needy and the most underprivileged. But if I could come back to you, Mr. Chris Hunsinger, PRASA has lacked leadership and been on the ropes for quite some time. Even though Ms. Lillian Mofokeng earlier on stated, she said, in fact, that PRASA has some sort of stability. But I think PRASA has lacked leadership, and it has been on the ropes for quite some time. In December 2019, Minister of Transport, Mr. Fikile Mbalula, appointed Mr. Bongisizwe Mpondo as administrator in an effort to revive it. This appointment was controversial and it was short-lived. In September 2020, that was last month, the National Treasury appointed Mr. Badisa Macheru as the new accounting authority of PRASA after a Western Cape High Court order set aside Mr. Mpondo's appointment. PRASA has been without a permanent board since 2017. There have been 5 interim boards at the agency, and amidst all of this, we are hearing about PRASA officials even colluding with criminals in the theft of railway infrastructure. And as an example, in this regard, I could tell you that Minister Fikile Mbalula, in fact, was the one who said that a present and a former employee had at some point been caught with PRASA assets worth more than 2 million rand. How do you believe these factors have contributed to the destruction of South Africa's railway system?
I think it contributes directly because it causes instability. And any form of instability, has a profound impact on management principles, also the culture of an organization. And this really has a longer history, even than the period that you just covered. I mean, fact is that we've had 4 ministers in the last 6 years. On average, we've had 54 vacancies in terms of boards amongst the 12 entities of which PRASA is one, under the Department of Transport. Also in terms of financial management, we've seen, despite the huge needs that we have with PRASA, that billions, in fact 2.5 billion rand in the 2018-19 financial year simply gets moved out of the PRASA budget as if there are no needs, as if passengers and commuters do not have any needs. So large sums of money simply has been moved to Sunroll e-tolls, for instance. So if you look on a larger scale, in terms of financial competence, in a 5-year cross-cut analysis, you would see that about 1% of unauthorized, irregular, fruitless and wasteful expenditure has been recovered. 1%, 3% have been condoned, 7% have been written off, and 89% has not been dealt with. Which is an illustration, of how serious financial management is viewed. But then, in particular, in terms of the vandalism that occurred, and the safety for, trains and commuters, but also staff, because it is Metrorail staff that sit in front of the locomotives that often are confronted by angry commuters. So, it's not just passengers and commuters that are threatened, but also staff and officials that have to deal with the unsafe trains and, the railway safety regulators' involvement with manual authorizations and measures through which they then declare a particular section of rail not being safe. So it's a long history of this. So if you do an analysis of these safety reports from the railway safety regulator, you know, then vandalism and cable theft was about 19% of the safety restrictions. 69% of the safety issues can be related directly to management issues, and that relates to faulty signaling, faulty tracks, and speed restrictions because of unsafe conditions. So these were in times when coaches and trains were running. Then already there were safety issues with manual authorizations that exponentially increased. I mean, in January 2018, the number of manual authorizations was in the order of 35,000. That escalated to way over 1.8 million manual authorizations in July 2019. So, you know, subsequently, yes, now we've got a destroyed infrastructure because of negligence. There were security companies involved. The contracts lapsed. Replacement contracts were not in place. Other security companies simply wasn't paid, and they left the site to be vandalized. So yes, certainly an argument and a debate can be made for negligence on management side. On the other hand, Zahid, I must say that we are encouraged by the recent appointment of the board. We are encouraged with the appointment of vacant positions in senior management, but you need competent people with a passion for rail. You need experienced people. You can't just simply employ anybody in railway. You need people that are absolutely passionate about rail and that have experience.
Yeah, and I think time will really tell us how this turns out and whether these appointments will be of any benefit to the company. And I will ask your thoughts a little later on in the discussion on the new board. Where do you see PRASA going, and what do you see as a result of these new appointments? But just coming back to one of the points you made, Mr. Steve Harris, was that you requested engagement with ministers such as the Minister of Public Enterprises. What exactly was UNTU seeking when you made these requests?
Well, obviously, at the time we made the request was to find a collaboration with all the different departments that are involved so that we can find a solution together at the end. Because at the end of the day, Transnet and PRASA use, there's a lot of the rails that are used by both parties. And whether we like it or not, Transnet has capabilities that could have assisted and can assist even going forward in the process. And it's for that reason why we wanted the Minister of Public Enterprises to be part of the discussion. As far as the Minister of Police and the Minister of Transport and Minister of Defence was concerned, is that the rail lines are open. It's anyone can come in from any direction onto the station, and we wanted them to assist us in this periods to safeguard the passengers and to safeguard our employees that are under tremendous threat whilst they were driving these trains. But I think one of the biggest problems and mistakes that the government has made is there's no regulation of scrapyards, and there's not sufficient policing of scrapyards either. And whilst that continues and is allowed to continue unregulated, well, then you're going to continue having rail lines stolen. You're going to continue having cables stolen because there's an offset opportunity. And I can go and sell, which I've stolen last night or this morning or during the course of the day. I can go and sell it for a loaf of bread tomorrow. And whilst that is unregulated, we're going to continue. I mean, if I steal something and I can't sell it, then it's of no use of me. But and let's not be fooled. Transnet is facing the same problem in particular areas where the trains pass the settlement, human settlement areas, which are close to the rail, and that's also not assisting, and it's also endangering the children in the vicinity of the railway lines.
Yeah, and unfortunately, time is really against us. So I'm just going to have to squeeze in one of the comments here, which comes from Mr. Aslam Vanker, who says, "For decades, our railway networks were one of the best in the world. It's a pity that criminals are even given the opportunity to vandalize the railway property. There is no harsh punishment for those that vandalize state property, so it's no wonder why they keep vandalizing." So I think even that's one of the contributions to this is the lack of accountability for vandals and people who are participating in the looting of railway infrastructure. I think that's one of the key issues when it comes to many different topics that we discuss here on the show. When it came to corruption, kidnapping, I think it was accountability that was the main culprit here. And so unfortunately, we would have loved to continue this discussion much longer, but unfortunately, we don't have really that much time. So just to wrap up now, Mr. Steve Harris, you can wrap up first. What is it that you think will take it would take to improve our railway network and to address this matter once and for all?
It's going to take a huge effort from all of us in this country to put our heads together and find a solution. And when I say all of us, it includes the communities, because as Lillian indicated previously, that the communities are also our eyes and ears out there. But the most of all, we need the collaboration of the South African police as well. I mean, they've just employed 3,100 people to assist with security. But if you haven't armed them properly, I mean, you cannot give them a baton and expect them to go against a person with an AK-47. And they haven't had sufficient training either. They find themselves in a total lion's den at this point in time. So it's going to take some time, and it's going to take effort from everyone around to try and get the railway lines back and ensure that the trains can start running again for the poorest of the poor. And let me also just remind the people that we were instigators or the main instigator to assist and to get PRASA to get diesel locomotives on the lines so that we can in the interim use diesel locomotives. But it's costly. If we can continue with that, we can have some more lines open. But it takes a collaborated effort and process between Transnet and PRASA, but which are both state-owned enterprises. And if the two ministers also work together, and we can find solutions, and I'm sure if we start appointing the correct people, then we can get railway lines back. But it's going to take billions to get it back to what it was.
And I think in this discussion alone, we've just scratched merely the surface of this discussion. There's much more to discuss here when it comes to the infrastructure of our railway system, the vandalism thereof. But your final thoughts, Mr. Chris Hunsinger, how do you think we can address this issue?
Thank you. I think the first thing that should happen is that people that are responsible for vandalizing any state assets should be charged appropriately. And to me, the appropriate charge is sabotage and terrorism. It cannot be that people can simply attack and remove state property and then get away with petty crime charges. It's not acceptable, and it shouldn't happen in that way. In terms of solutions to fix it, I think it is important that we immediately merge PRASA and Transnet and combine the expertise that we have in those two entities. Apart from the benefits in terms of management capability and capacity, effectiveness and efficiency that we would get in merging those two entities, We would also save R1 billion per year, because the current state of affairs is that they share assets which all belong to the same government and the same state. Therefore, R1 billion, which is currently cross-invoiced between the two entities, can immediately be saved. And with that, 250 train sets can immediately be purchased. Other than that, it is important to focus on commuter needs. Hundreds of PRASA buses are currently standing and collecting dust in Joburg. Those buses can be used to transport commuters, to honor the people that bought seasonal tickets and monthly tickets, to make up for the loss in transport which they currently experience. Furthermore, it is three simple things that commuters want. It is not difficult and it is not sophisticated. They want safe, clean and reliable rail. And the things that we should focus on is protection of our people, which include passengers and commuters and staff. We should protect assets and we should protect capital, because it is tax money that funds these services ultimately.
All right, thank you so much. I think there's a lot more to be discussed here. This discussion certainly does have much more depth to it. And one of the points which we mentioned in this discussion was, which were brought up in this discussion, was the role of metal recycling and the lack of regulation in that industry. And I must place on record that we did invite the Metal Recyclers Association of South Africa, but unfortunately they declined for whatever reason to participate in this discussion. And I think that's where we are going to have to leave it for this evening. We are going to take a quick ad break, and when we get back, we are going to go straight into our competition segment for this evening. But in the meantime, let me thank you, gentlemen, for your participation. Mr. Steve Harris, General Secretary of the United National Transport Union, and Mr. Chris Hunsinger, Shadow Minister of Transport. Thank you so much for your time and
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Zahid,
Zahid,
gentlemen.
and best wishes.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, please do stay with us while we take a quick ad break, and when we get back, we get straight into the competition. Please do stay tuned.